So let's say your kid comes home one day and shows you a report card that looks a little something like this. Anything jump out at you? Well, if you're like most parents, really all you see when you look at this is this. This is a thought experiment from the...
Can you hear the video when I'm playing it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's audible. Yeah.
Marcus Buckingham. This is a thought experiment from the author Marcus Buckingham, and I think what it shows us is that we all tend to focus on problems rather than strengths. It would be the rare parent indeed that would look at this report card and say, wow, honey, you've got such a strength in English. How can we make more of that?
Can you please mute your mic while
Study. Be the rare parent indeed that would look at this report card and say, wow, honey, you've got such a strength in English. How can we make more of that? We all use our powers of analysis primarily to study what isn't working rather than to study what is working. So think about all the times in your lives when you've been on phone calls with friends and they've been agonizing about the problems in their relationships, and the many, many flaws of their partners. But have you ever been on a single call where the person was obsessing about why things were working so well, with an eye towards doing more of that in the future? Or as parents, we really want to get to the bottom of why our kids got an F, so we can correct it. But we don't obsess about why our kids got an A. What were they doing differently in that class than in the others? Most of the time, this problem-solving focus serves us very well. If you're a manager and things are working pretty well across the board except for one trouble spot, by all means, solve that problem. But there's one situation in life where this backfires on us, and that's in times of change. Because in times of change, our report cards don't look near flawless. Our report cards look pretty mixed. There's a lot of stuff that's not working very well. There's a lot of stuff that may be failing outright. And if we allow ourselves to slip into problem-solving focus in that time, that's a recipe for inaction, for paralysis. There's simply too many problems to be solved. In times of change, what we need to do instead is to focus on the bright spots, the early glimmers that something is working right. And once we find those bright spots, our mission is to study them and to clone them. So let's say at work you started a new sales process 6 months ago, and the results so far have been a little bit mixed. You've had 2 reps that have doubled their sales, and 6 more that have basically stayed at the same sales level, and then a couple of more that have slipped, and 3 that have just bottomed out. And in fact, they're threatening to quit if you don't go back to the old sales process. So what do? As a manager, where do you spend your time? Well, most managers would slip into problem-solving mode, and they'd spend most of their time dealing with those 3 bellyachers at the bottom. Because we would figure that those 2 superstars at the top, well, they can take care of themselves. But this is exactly backward. We should be spending our time figuring out what these 2 reps are doing differently. What's making them so successful? Maybe they've cooked up their own sales literature. Maybe they've figured out a better way to approach customers. But regardless, if we understand what's making them succeed, then we can potentially spread those practices around and make everybody better. So as a manager, are you getting to spend enough of your time scaling and cloning what is working today? Or are you spending most of your time having to put out fires and deal with what's not working?
Yes, Kiran. Thank you so much for sharing. That's exactly the philosophy that we try and work with at TIJ, and that's the same philosophy that we will also be as we look at Amalya Ravela's classroom today. In no classroom across the world, and even more so ours, we will find things that are we'll always find things that are breaking down and challenges that we are facing. However, with the bright spots, we try and identify what is working and think about how we can replicate that. And that is what that is the lens that I'm going to request all of us to hold as we view and study this classroom as well. It's essentially the bright spots theory. A lot of more has been written about this, but this is in a nutshell what you need to know as we explore this class.
So what I understood from from the first artifact, which was like describing about the RC levels. So what we have seen, what I have understood, that there is a major shift within, I think, 10 or 11 months, more than 1 year time. There is a huge shift in RC levels, and when we saw the writing samples, what we actually see, a lot of students actually they are articulating their thoughts. They're able to write what they want to write. In the first, like, I think in 2017 wala photos, like there were, like, even they were having like trouble in making sentences, but in the latter part, in the next photos, we see that they're articulating their thoughts very well, and their sentences are mostly well constructed. Yeah, those are the shifts which we can see in the outcomes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay. Anybody else want to share your reflections? You can type it in, or just unmute yourself and share with the entire group. Thanks, Mroy. Yes. So like both of like Priti and Mridmoy have shared, we are seeing essentially a lot of growth in literacy in this classroom. Students are not only reading and comprehending better than they were a year ago. There's also a lot of improvement in articulation of thought, especially written from the artifacts. That we are exploring. Can I request, Kiran, do you want to just read the fellow reflection on the slide for us, please?
Sure. A year and a half ago, only a handful of students were, the right side is not visible, sorry. Yes, were able to read with a class average of 0.2 at beginning of the year. 60% of our students across reading levels have made more than 2 years of growth in reading comprehension in the past year and a half, or from the time they joined us. A further 76% of students have made more than 1.5 years of growth.
Okay, so now that we've identified a student outcome of this classroom, that is essentially a bright spot of this classroom, what we're going to now explore is what did the teachers do and what enabled the students to grow in this specific regard. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to share again 3 to 4 artifacts that highlight teacher actions, and we will try and break down what do we think the fellows did in order to enable the students to grow in literacy.
Okay, so what I see, like I have noted down 3 4 things which I have seen within those artifacts. First, I see a gradual, in the first artifact I saw like a clear gradual change of process and methods. Like first they started with making connection to themselves, and then to the city, and like step by step they have changed their methods, and it was a gradual process. So it was not it was easy for the students also to understand and process the information. And I saw a lot of opinion writing happening, and uh, when I say opinion writing, like for opinion writing we need a lot of critical thinking skills, which was happening with use of visuals. A lot of, like, um, times they were seeing things and they are writing. So those things also were there. Also I saw goal setting and reflection in terms of academics and VNM also. So this were the teacher action I could understand, which actually I think helped student uh, grow and reach where they exactly were.
Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my reflections on when I was studying this classroom. What specific teacher actions do we think led to the students to this specific student outcome, right? We're not looking at teacher actions as a whole. We're at which fellow interventions led to growth in literacy of this classroom specifically. I've identified three buckets. I'm sure when you are also exploring these artifacts, you have seen this come alive in various capacities. I'm going to take a few minutes and break them down for you. At any point, if you have any questions regarding these enablers, please feel free to type that in, and I will take any questions after that. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first teacher action of having students set their own goals. You must have seen that in an artifact. What this does is two things. It helps students build a sense of I can and I want. This is the goal that I have set for myself as opposed to a goal that somebody else has set for me. So instead of my teacher telling me you want to make growth in your reading levels by 0.5, I'm setting a goal for myself. So it increases student investment towards the work they're doing, and hence this is one of the intervention that one very specific teacher intervention that has led to this very specific student outcome. Okay, the second practice that worked in this classroom and led to these bright spots was the idea of student practice in class and the strategy of annotation. I'm going to take a minute and break this down for all of us. So the concept of student practice was the fellows focused on students practicing in the classroom as opposed to giving homework and students working after class. There was a lot of emphasis on learning by doing in the classroom. And the second skill very specifically used in this classroom across content was annotation. Again, you must have seen in the artifacts that when students are reading, they're writing their comments via symbols on the reading passage itself, as opposed to a normal strategy of read first and then answer questions, right? What this does, it helps students comprehend as they're reading. It helps them understand as they're reading. It also helps them make connections to self, world, community as they're reading, right? So this is one very specific strategy that led to growth in RC and writing in this classroom, was students practicing in class, emphasis of that, and the strategy of annotation in class. So this is a strategy that was used in English, SST science, so on and so forth. Right? So the two strategies that we discussed: students setting their own goals, student practice and annotation. And thirdly, again, you must have seen students reading a lot in the classroom. When students are exposed to a variety of literature, it builds the love for reading. So students in this classroom are not only reading their own textbooks, they're reading a lot of stories, which helps build a love for the language. Once students develop a love for the language and a love for reading, it accelerates growth in literacy and writing. Yeah, I'm going to pause and synthesize the exercise essentially that we've followed so far. We started with identifying a bright spot in this classroom, that was growth in literacy and writing. We then explored artifacts to identify what did the teachers do to build towards this outcome, and we identified three things: student setting goals, student practice and annotation, and reading authentic literature in the classroom.
Behave with them like a friend with them, or don't abuse them. In class, the teamwork is the most highest value because we do all the things in team. In our team, there is 6 people. We give each other one chance to do. Whenever Didi asks some questions and we don't understand, we didn't raise our hands, but Sakib raises hands, and whenever we have group discussion in RC paper, he explained us very nicely. Because of that, today in our class 12% were on 5 and only 12% were 0.5. Changes I have seen in Ume that last year she used to be very scared because she is new. Now she is not scared, and if someone got hurt in our team, she goes to help. Like example, me and my partner fight a lot because he don't listen what I say, and she comes, she solve our problem that we don't fight in later because we have partner that I can help. That's why he is sitting with me. I have seen Samira change. Then last year she used to fight with each other, but this year she is more calm and she tried to help her partner. Tosin had got more change I have seen in by Samira. Without communication, we cannot do anything. So, from communication, we help each other. We tell the meanings. If we communicate with each other, they can solve our problem. What we are hiding in our mind. That's why it is important to be communicate with each other, not as teacher, not as mother's father or parents, but we need to communicate with someone that we are trusting more than other people. Last year we have a problem box. If we have any problem,
Uh, our students believe Our students believe that there is partnership between their teachers and themselves. For the first half of last year, students worked largely for themselves, fought with each other, and complained about each other all the time. Students now believe that success is when the entire group or class improves and not just themselves. This was clear to see when the class got 10 new students at the beginning of this year. Our students welcomed them into their groups, spent extra time teaching them reading and math operation, and getting them up to speed with everything.
So, but also a lot of the culture in the classroom is around a community and teamwork and talking to each other and communicating to each other and problem solving together. And hence that was an outcome that you can see will come out very strongly in the student reflections as well as the teacher reflections. The second bright spot that we identified in this classroom. Three things again that I identified when I was studying this classroom. You can take a minute to read it as I share as well. The first one that I identified was an emphasis on student work time. So all the entire classroom, the entire day was structured around students working together. So the classroom, there was no individual, there was rarely an individual task a student had to do in this classroom. There was a lot of emphasis on a group task, right? So that builds a culture of we all have to do this together. I have to make sure everyone in my team is participating and contributing and understanding and growing, because there's a culture of everything that's happening in the classroom. Any task, any problem, any lesson is centered around students working together, right? So that builds that culture of we all need to work together in the classroom. And another structure for the same piece was something called the math mentors. So a lot of the topics in math, all the new topics, so to say, the math teacher taught in class. Any revision or reteaching or reiteration or any doubts that the students had, each group had a math mentor, and the math mentor had the responsibility of clearing these doubts. Yeah, so I think that these two specific actions creates an emphasis of we all need to work together in this classroom. It's not if I understand and if I complete my work, it's not enough. I need to ensure that everyone in my team understands this concept, everyone in my team is participating, because it's a group task, right? So a lot of emphasis on group tasks and collaboration is the first intervention that led to the student outcome. The second intervention is what the teachers in this classroom call the circle of trust. Essentially, this is a student LC, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with. What the circle of trust did was it created a space in the classroom for the students to really understand each other, to understand their lives beyond the classroom. It created a space where students could be vulnerable and share their problems. So I know that if my peer is acting a certain way today, I know that they've been struggling at home or something is happening and hence they're feeling this way. So it really helps the students understand each other more. And that creates a culture of community of this is my friend, I care about this person, so on and so forth. So hence the structure of a student LC, or as the class called it, the circle of trust, right? Because and you can see directly how the value of trust and vulnerability and sharing my problems leads to a feeling of teamwork and community in the classroom. And the third, and I think the most interesting thing that I learned from this classroom was a sense of integration. So this classroom, a lot of the students participated in a project called Just for Kicks, which is essentially football. A lot of the students in this classroom are playing football. What the teachers did is they collaborated with the coaches of Just for Kicks. If you have time and you're exploring some of the artifacts in this classroom later, I would recommend you explore two artifacts. Explore the teaching video of Amalya. So what they were learning in that day in English was they were reading a passage about sacrifice and friendship. Yeah, so that's what they learned in English that day. After school, and all of them went and played. When all of them had football practice, at the end of the football practice exercise, the coaches also debriefed the students on how do you think you made a sacrifice for your peers today when you were practicing, or how do you think somebody else made a sacrifice for you. So a lot of integration in this classroom. So football or any other sport, as you know, builds a lot of teamwork and collaboration. They made sure that it was integrated with the classroom culture. So the students knew that I'm not only showing teamwork and collaboration on the field, I'm also showing it in the classroom when I am learning. Yeah, so again, to synthesize this for all of us, we saw that a bright spot in this classroom was the culture of teamwork and collaboration. The three teacher actions that we've identified that led to this was making sure that all the learning in the classroom is happening through groups. So all the tasks are centered around students working together. Student LCs to create a space of trust and vulnerability amongst the students. And lastly, integrating any extracurricular, in this case, football, with the classroom. Reiterate the exercise that we followed today, and hopefully you can follow a similar exercise as you're exploring not only other TIJ classrooms, but also hopefully you can practice the similar exercise for your own classrooms. Essentially, what we spent time doing was we started with looking at a classroom and identifying what are the bright spots in terms of student outcomes, and then we backtracked into saying, okay, what teacher actions led to this, right? What I hope this has illustrated for you as well, and this is one of the reasons we do the TIJ learning group as well, is these are things that don't seem too daunting. These are most of the practices. I'm sure you're doing very similar practices in your own classroom or have done in the past. There might be practices that fellows are doing a little bit differently. But essentially, this is a form of our own internal research to identify classrooms that have similar contexts as our similar challenges as we face in our own classrooms. What is working in these classrooms, and how can we learn from these practices and adapt them to our own needs. Another great thing I feel, and this practice I hope you do for your own classrooms as well, I'm going to take a shot at answering a question that we received earlier, was think about how I can replicate the same mental exercise for my own classroom. So for example, if I see my students are very interested in X and Y lesson, but they're not as interested in certain other lessons that I'm teaching, instead of my approach being, okay, my students are not interested in this lesson, I need to change it, or I need to do better, or I need to learn more strategies, etc., etc., etc. Can I pause and think about, okay, I see my students being very interested and passionate and hardworking in a certain kind of lessons. Can I pause and identify what am I doing as a teacher that's enabling my students to be interested and passionate and hardworking in these lessons, and then can I replicate that practice for my other lessons as well. So I hope you will take this framework and use it for your own classrooms as well, and let me know how that goes. So yes, so essentially we explored two student outcomes and what enabled them in Amalya Ravela's classroom. There are a few other outcomes from this classroom, a few other bright spots that we did study, but I wanted to, since it's the first call, I wanted to take it easy and just explore two student outcomes. But if and when you find time, please take some time and explore the other TIJ classroom profiles and do a similar exercise of bright spots and inputs, and see how you can adapt them to your own classroom needs.